Well, Grindstone is happening. You guys are getting back a little late. That's okay. Come on in. But we'll pick up with Habakkuk, and we'll finish it really quick here. But it's some really rich theology that I don't want us to miss. But I won't talk too long about it, so we can get out early tonight. Oh yes, thank you. While I am on the topic and being reminded, so remember everybody, the midterm's coming up this week, the 12th through the 15th. I'll probably have the test link open maybe 8:30ish on Thursday, and it'll close up on the 15th at midnight. But I'll post that in the details that you'll see. Multiple choice, not multiple answer, true, false, and a couple of essays that are, medium size, not asking you to write a book. So just be prepared. It's going to be open note, open Bible, open book. That's the midterm. You've got the study guide that I've given you some things to maybe focus in on. Make sure you understand. There's a reading quiz that I failed to post on Habakkuk, Zephaniah. That'll be posted probably tomorrow in this week's Week 8's reading or assignment folder. So just know that that's coming. I apologize for that being a little bit late this week. And then I've also, the good news is I've got some extra credit opportunities already posted now. Two different, I think, interesting articles related to the prophets and certain aspects of things we've only briefly talked about. You can dive in a little deeper and then write up a kind of a summary article. I've given you the instructions there. Submit it to Turnitin, and the extra credit opportunities are worth 10 points each. So there you go.
10 points on the final grade.
10 points to the bottom line.
Sweet.
Yep. All right. So I'm very generous with extra credit. I may think of another extra credit opportunity. I always like to throw in opportunities for maybe 30 to 40 points extra credit to the bottom line. But I'm always shocked at how few students take advantage of the extra credit. But they're going to be there. Everybody will have availability for those. So, all right. Well, let's pick up where we left off with Habakkuk.
When does the midterm close?
On the 15th.
15th, okay.
At midnight.
11:59.
Yes.
If you wait until 11:59 to start the test, you'll be emailing me the next morning, and we'll have to talk. All right. So if it's true that Habakkuk is kind of laying out the theology of the coming exile, you have to kind of think of this idea. There's going to be a faithful remnant in Jerusalem, in and around in the southern nation. The faithful remnant, you three guys over here in your households, you're the faithful remnant. And Kristen in the back. Sorry, Jared. And Kelsey. So you're just over here. You snuck in. Faithful remnant. You've been faithful all along. You're starting to ask this question. Well, if this is going to happen to all of Judah, we're a subset of Judah. What is the Lord's plan for us? How should we respond? And what's interesting is the prophet Habakkuk doesn't leave you high and dry. He's going to address your big question. He's going to address your theological concerns. And we've already seen this with other prophets. They're always going to be the majority of unfaithful, message of judgment, trying to get your attention, time to repent. But to you all over here, well, we've been faithful all along. What's our future? What's our hope? And so what's interesting is that we see that the prophet Habakkuk answers that very question. And it's in a very famous verse, and it's just around the corner. What happens when the storm comes? So the prophetic strategy for this is directed to the faithful remnant. When the storm comes, it's inevitable, it seems. How should we, the faithful, respond? Storms have a way, when they come, of sorting things out really quick. These are the storms that we experience. So Habakkuk is going to, one little section here I want to talk about. He continues to go on and build this kind of this nervous angst. I mean, he's lighting the fire of anxiety. The Chaldeans, verse 15 in chapter 1, the Chaldeans bring all of them up with a hook This is similar language that we saw in Amos. Remember the fat cows? He turns right around and describes for Israel in the north and the fall of Samaria. They're going to be dragged through the breaches in the wall. Fish hooks, which would translate to the Assyrian brutality of putting nose hooks through the captives. Dragging them away with their net. They gather them together in the fishing net. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Verse 16. Therefore they offer a sacrifice to their net and burn incense to their fishing net. That's the religion of conquering and taking over. And this is part of their religion as well. Because through these things their catch is large and their food is plentiful. Will they therefore empty their net and continually slay nations without sparing? You all over here, what should we do? What's our posture when this storm comes? And he pauses. You've all maybe left church. You've gone, we're giving up on this guy. We don't want to hear anything more from him. But for the faithful remnant, this is what he says in chapter 2, verse 1. This is what the faithful do. I stand on my watchtower, my guard post, and station myself on the rampart. I'll keep watch to see what he will speak to me, and how I may reply when I'm reproved. Then the Lord answered me and said, record this vision and inscribe it on tablets, that the one who reads it may run. So this is going to be carried around the nation through a courier. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It hastens towards its goal, and it will not fail. It's going to come. Though it tarries, wait for it. For it will certainly come. It will not delay. And here's what he says, verse 4. Behold, as for the proud one, and look where I'm pointing. You all over here are prideful. Sorry. But your spiritual pride shows up here. Do you see it, Ben? And now you're in that group. Unfortunately, I'm talking to you too. You're the proud. Behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right within him. But, here's what he says, the righteous will live by his faith. The righteous will live by his faith. It's this picture for you. It doesn't change. Storm comes, but your posture is, I've already talked about, you've got the hinds feet. You've got the faith. That's what you do. That's what the faithful do. It's just no different than that picture of the little goats darting around the rocky crags. You're well prepared for the coming storm. That's what you do. The proud, the proud are going to respond like this. I can ignore the storm. The proud say, I can just stand up against the storm. The storm's not really going to tear down my home. I don't really have to do anything. That kind of response. But second response that Habakkuk gives is for the righteous, the faithful remnant, living by faith. The righteous are the ones who can withstand the storms because the faith is like this lighthouse. It just takes the beating and it keeps standing strong. They can. It's no different than Job when we looked at chapter 2, when he's had this adversity bomb fall on his household, and his wife is saying, curse God and die. But he says, look, is it wrong? Is it right for me to only accept the good from the Lord and not the adversity? So he's got the same kind of position. This is Job's position as well. So the adversity that we keep talking about is the storm, that's coming this way. The feet are always on terra firma, and they stand strong. So this is the picture that emerges. What's interesting about this picture is in the New Testament, right? Probably rings a bell. Let's turn to Romans, some of the New Testament authors. Romans chapter 1, verse 17. Paul uses this same picture. He says in verse 16, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, but also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith. What kind of faith, Paul? Well, to faith, as it is written, quoting Habakkuk, but the righteous man shall live by faith. And we can turn to Galatians 3:11. Paul again quotes Habakkuk when he's trying to argue with the Judaizers. What's the kind of faith that is the faith that justifies? Remember Paul, justification by faith, that New Testament argument that he's having with the first century legalists? It's this picture for Paul. That's what he's talking about. Also, we see it in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38. This verse, Habakkuk 2:4, is quoted again in the Great Hall of Fame. So that's what authentic faith looks like in the Old and New Testament. All right, well, let's keep going here. So the rest of the chapter, in chapter 2 in Habakkuk, verses 6 through 20, focus on a series of accusations or woes against the ruthless and powerful elite in and around Judah. Just I think it could possibly just refer to the ruthless leaders of the Babylonians, but just as well the ruthless and powerful elite of Judah. So like verse 12, woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and founds a town with violence. Is it not indeed from the Lord of hosts that peoples toil for fire and nations grow weary for nothing? It's just a kind of an example of what we see here. But this woe to him who builds a city of bloodshed, that gets back to the injustice problem that Amos attacks in Samaria and in Israel. Now it's crept down into Judah, and there's this kind of fat cows. The fat cows now are being addressed just like they were in Samaria. Now they've crept into Judah, and they're the fat cows all over again. They're going to be dragged away, as we saw, with fishhooks, just like Amos talks about in Amos chapter 4. But in contrast to all of this, what is the faithful remnant? What are they supposed to know? Verse 14. When in the midst of all of this chaos, verse 14, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge and the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So every now and then you see little interludes of correct theology with regards to, well, what's the Lord up to? The knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That's what the earth will be filled with. That's the end. That's the end game to all of this. So from Habakkuk's vantage point, this is kind of a goofy picture, I know. Habakkuk is bringing in, that's a confused picture, which is the confused situation in Judah at the time of Habakkuk. Habakkuk's bringing in the divine vantage point. And really, it's because the majority of y'all in Judah, you've adopted this kind of syncretistic idea, religious syncretism. You're talking about the Lord, and in our case, Christ, but other things get thrown in, and it becomes a confusing picture. So religious syncretism for Judah would be Yahweh plus other little g gods. And Habakkuk is going to address this in chapter 2, right at the end there in verse 18. He says, what profit is the idol when its maker has carved it, or an image, a teacher of falsehood? For its maker trusts in his own handiwork when he fashions speechless idols. We have to be careful in our day, our modern context, that we don't turn God into an idol of our own making, right? We have to remind ourselves of who truly God is in all of his person, his name and his reputation, and everything that God is and who he is truthfully from his word, and not come up with our own idea of who God is, because that's the world around us. They've got a lot of goofy ideas about who God is and who Jesus is, and they've got us pigeonholed, and it's interesting. But Habakkuk goes on, woe to him who says to a piece of wood, awake, to a dumb stone, arise, and that is your teacher? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there's no breath at all inside of it. It's dead. When I was in Thailand, in Bangkok, probably maybe some of you have been in this situation, you witness the idolatry that's well entrenched, and Like, for example, if this was an eating establishment, and the corner of the building would be, in the room would be what's called a spirit house. And every morning you'd see them putting the incense and leaving little offerings of food to the god or to the spirits that would own that land. And if they didn't pay homage, the fear would be that the spirits that own that property would start turning over tables. And they believe this stuff. And interestingly, in some cases, you hear the missionaries talk. They don't like to talk about it much, but they'll tell you stories of where they're driving past this tree out in the middle of the field outside of the city limits, going to the next city, and the idea is that you don't go past that tree, and they experienced their car being turned over. There's no explanation. It's crazy stuff. But this is the demonic, world that is behind all of the idolatry. There's a real power and real force behind it, but we know that's from the evil one, because his agenda is to disrupt and confuse and distort. That's what he's doing. And he does that through this kind of, was as true then it is as now. So we have to be careful. But Habakkuk is going to end at the right place. Look at verse 20 in chapter 2. In the midst of all this confusion, let me remind the faithful remnant of one thing. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. So this is where we always end up. It's the Lord on his throne as king, reigning and ruling in the fullness of his name and his reputation. That moves things. That changes things. And we're going to see the prophets come back to this idea. Just like Isaiah, with his call, had this vision of the Lord on his throne. It comes back again. It's the same idea. So if you're ever in a situation of starting a new ministry, or if you're called to move into an existing ministry that needs fixing, never a bad place to start in your preaching and teaching ministry with exalting God and all of his attributes and reminding people of who God is. It's a great place to lay a foundation. So that's where we kind of see things going here. Now, so Habakkuk is going to end. Chapter 3, you see it says in verse 1, a prayer of Habakkuk to the prophet according to a hard word to pronounce, Shiganoth. 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 That word means an emotional poem. That's what that fancy Hebrew word means. And he's going to begin with a petition in chapter 3, verse 2. Lord, I've heard the report about thee, and I will fear. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. God comes from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran. His splendor covers the heavens, and the earth is full of his praise. His radiance is like the sunlight. He has rays of flashing from his hand, and there is the hiding of his power. Before him goes pestilence, and plague comes after him. So there's highly emotional poem that's going on. But like prophets before, Habakkuk is receiving a vision in an emotional way of the majesty and the power and the glory of God. You see it in the details of this poem. In the centerpiece of this poem, let's turn over to verse 13. What's interesting about this verse is how it might be possibly an echo from something that we've heard before. Verse 13, thou didst go forth for the salvation of thy people. So thou, you Lord, you went forth for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. You did strike the head of the house of the evil, or the evil one, to lay him open from thigh to neck. Does that echo? Is that a faint echo of anything that we've heard before? The Lord will go forward for the salvation of his people, for the anointed, and in the process strike the head of the house of the evil, or the evil one. Maybe Genesis 3:15. From the very beginning, we're introduced to the idea that one's going to come from the seed of woman who will come on the scene and bruise the strike the head of the serpent, but in the process he himself will be bruised on the heel. So there's this this battle that's going to take place with one from the seed of the woman who will come on. So I kind of reckon this particular reference is to at least Habakkuk's awareness that, while there's an immediate conflict, immediate battle, but God's long-term agenda is to take care of situations like this. And that's what we have here. The Lord himself is coming for the salvation of the anointed and for the salvation of his people. And then finally, Habakkuk's going to end with another encouragement for the faithful. While the storm is coming, and things will probably get worse before they get better, but his encouragement is that the better will come. The better will come. Let's look at the last few verses of chapter 3. And he says, "And I heard from my inward parts, I heard, and my inward parts trembled. At the sound of my lips they quivered. Decay enters my bones. In my place I tremble, because I must wait quietly for the day of distress, for the people to arise who will invade us." So there's the bad. That's the bad, right? That's coming first. That's the impending enemy who comes, and you're waiting nervously, and it's like your bones are just creaking and decaying and trembling because you're waiting for this day of distress. In verse 17, there's a transition. "Though the fig tree should not blossom, and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, though my checking account gets to zero, though I lose my job, though I end up in the hospital on my back for weeks with this disease that I'm trying to get healed, and the fields produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold, and there be no cattle in the stalls, yet, I will exult in the Lord. I'll rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he has made my feet like hinds' feet, and he makes me walk on high places." I'm writing all this down for the choir director on my stringed instruments, right? That's what he ends with. So it's a song, right? It's put to music. But he comes back to the hinds' feet with faith idea, and that's how we survive the storm. That's how the faithful respond, and that's the encouragement that we have. So the elimination of feet, we could go, and I won't spend time doing this because I know at least one person in this room wants to leave early. But the details of this bounty and this reference to fig trees and the fruit and the olive groves and all the produce and the cattle in the stalls, we go back to Deuteronomy, and we're reminded that Moses makes all of these things and references as blessings. But what happens when those blessings seem to be evaporating away? That's the kind of the backdrop to this, this hinds' feet and high places idea. So we won't look there. Leviticus 26, verse 18 and verse 20, and Deuteronomy 6:11, and some of these passages from Moses were intended to remind God's people when things are good, it's because, and it's in response to faithfulness and fidelity. But if you turn, the people, then God's obligated to respond and remove those blessings for a time until he gets your attention. And that's the whole theology of the exile, which we've already seen in Hosea. We saw the details there. And then verse 18, and in the wilderness, when you're in the wilderness and all of those things are stripped away, you have a tendency to focus on what really matters, the one whom you love. Love means loyalty in the Old Testament, and you see the exaltation in the Lord. I'll rejoice in the God of my salvation, verse 18. And in the wilderness, you rediscover joy. In the wilderness, you focus on the one you love, verse 18. And in the wilderness, you rediscover the source of life. We already looked at Deuteronomy 8, 1 through 5. And the lesson of the wilderness, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord. And he ends with that's the picture of the hinds' feet in high places, those goats that have been an inspiration to many authors of the Old Testament who look at the goats and say, "Oh, that's a perfect picture of faith in the midst of adversity. It's those goats. They keep coming back. And I won't show you the video. Let's go to Zephaniah.
Question real quick.
Nope, no time for questions. We got to get out. I'm just kidding.
Okay.
What?
I'm just asking if it's okay if I ask.
Oh, go ahead.
It was just real quick. How would the
People or Israel in post-exilic time respond to that verse? You talked about this idea of
Post-exilic time.
the Lord in His holy temple, since they don't have a temple.
Where are we?
How would they respond? Back in 2:20.
Oh, 2:20.
Yeah.
In Habakkuk?
Yes. The question is just how would they respond to that verse, given that they didn't have a temple? It's like
Well, in the post-exilic period, they get a temple built.
they get
It's nothing like Solomon's temple. They get to that point of a little bit of discouragement, and we see the prophets who God raises up to encourage them to say, it's not about the temple that you've just built. It's about the temple that is coming. It's the one that... So even that in verse 20, we've got the Lord is in His holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before Him. Is really a reference to the temple, not the earthly temple. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think on the backdrop of any time you're sitting around looking at an earthbound temple, the faithful would always remind themselves, it's just temporary. We got one that's coming, and the Lord, when He comes, He's bringing His own temple, and we'll start to see the details of that when we get to Ezekiel and others who talk about the temple that's coming, all of its details. Zephaniah was also an active prophet, and let's turn there. Zephaniah, there's our deep thought picture. Zephan. Now he's talking about the day of the Lord, and that's the day of the Lord. So one of the prominent themes that comes into Zephaniah is the day of the Lord. So that's an easy way to remember that. It's interesting in terms of paralleling the history that we've already covered in OT2. You remember the reforming efforts of King Josiah. King Josiah was one of the good kings in Judah, and at a time of chaos, he comes in and institutes a politically grounded spiritual reform in an attempt to try to change things and bring about change. So Josiah around 640 to 609 BC. So Zephaniah is parallel to that same time period. So you've got you might say the political arm of the reform in Josiah, and you've got the prophetic arm of the reform in the prophet Zephaniah. And I think that's kind of pretty safe to say. I'm sure there's scholars out there that may go a different direction, but that's generally the well-grounded idea. And you remember that Josiah is going to, in the reconstruction efforts of the temple, there's this book of the law. Remember that's discovered, and that seems to initiate or instigate the aha moment for King Josiah to bring about and start instituting and commanding the reform, tearing down the idols, tearing down the temples to Baal and all of that, cleaning house, in other words. But I think it's interesting. It's I think there's some clues that might suggest that Zephaniah was actually operating as a prophet in advance of King Josiah and his aha moment, right in and around, right in that time period. 621 BC. So I think it's safe to say Zephaniah is active as a prophet, leading up to and maybe even lighting a little bit of the fire behind the spiritual renewal that's implemented by King Josiah. So that's my approach to the prophet Zephaniah. And there's interesting parallels in the actual message between Zephaniah and the prophet Jeremiah, who's also an active prophet during, as we'll see, King Josiah's reign and after King Josiah's reign in the days leading to the demise and the eventual collapse of Jerusalem. So we're starting to see I think you might think, broadly speaking, the Lord is turning up the volume knob you're going to have overlap with these prophets. Desperately, I think, and on his grace, trying to get the attention of the majority of unfaithful. Sorry, Ben, you're in the bad part, but you haven't repented yet. But the attempt is, God's trying to get the attention of the majority of unfaithful, but yet still encourage the faithful minority who have always been around. All right. We see in the genealogy of the prophet Zephaniah in the very first verse, the word of the Lord which came to Zephaniah, son of Cushi, son of Gedaliah, and Amariah, son of Hezekiah, in the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah. So there seems to be some kingly pedigree also wrapped up with this prophet Zephaniah. He may be very closely linked to the monarchy with regards to his pedigree, who he's related to. You see a big name there in terms of the genealogy there to King Hezekiah. His prophetic ministry would have overlapped with the details that we see if we go back to, like, say, 2 Kings chapters 22 through 23. So there's right around there is the hotbed for when Zephaniah would have been active. All right? Let's see, that's about all I want to say there. He's going to be like a courtroom lawyer. So this idea of this case that's being brought against God's people, we saw it before with the prophet Amos and this courtroom drama, how they structure oftentimes their prophetic message, where they get their information to make a case against God's people. Why are they guilty? Well, they oftentimes go back to the Pentateuch. They go back to the instruction of Moses. The foundation was already laid. We know the fork in the road. Moses laid it out for us. We know why the danger is coming. We have to repent. That's the whole idea. Well, what happens if we go into exile? Well, Moses said that if we repent when we're there, restoration. The Lord will respond to us and allow us to come back and rebuild. So all of this has been laid out in the book of Deuteronomy. And we can make some comparisons to some very specific direct connections with Deuteronomy and the prophet in some of the judgment passages of Zephaniah. Because you see a large center of gravity there. Let's Deuteronomy 28, let's just look at one of them as an example. Deuteronomy 28. Here we go. This is in the what's called typically the curses section or the judgment section that Moses lays out before he gets to the restoration chapter in chapter 30, but a lot of details here. Chapter 28. The idea of you shall marry, you'll take a wife in verse 30. 28:30. But another man shall violate her. You'll build a house, but you won't live in it. You'll plant a vineyard, but you won't use its fruit. You'll raise cows in verse 31, but they'll be slaughtered before your eyes. So this trying to build something and then it's torn down idea. That's the futility of when you're in an exilic situation. Somebody else is calling the shots. Zephaniah chapter 1 verse 13 says, moreover, their wealth will become plunder. Their house is desolate. Yes, they will build houses, but not inhabit them, and plant vineyards, but not drink their wine or eat of their fruit and all of that. The olive groves you'll plant, but other people will come in and plunder those too. It's this idea that Zephaniah, you see him building on these similar passages in Deuteronomy. So that's just a little short study in that. It may have something to do with the fact of the book of the law that was discovered in the temple rebuilding project of King Josiah. You might think of it that way, or I probably err on this side. I think Zephaniah probably knew his Bible. He's no different than Amos, showing up and saying, here's correct theology for the situation. We know better. Moses taught, Moses taught, Moses taught, Moses taught. So I think that's what's going on with the prophet Zephaniah. He knew about Moses' instruction on the curses or the judgments that come as the Lord responds to the rebellion of his people, and what the Lord is obligated to do, but he's also aware of the flip side of that. In other words, the dual-sided coin of covenant relationship. God's obligated to respond this way, but if the people repent, God is obligated to respond this way. So that's what we have, I think, in the book of Zephaniah. So this is the call to arms, you might say, at the very beginning of the Zephaniah speech. Let's have Derek, could you read for us here in first couple chapters? Let's starting in chapter 1, verse 2. Yep, you got to read it really mean, really intensely. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. This is a prophet speaking. Be a prophet. There you go.
I'll sweep away everything from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. I'll sweep away both men and the beast. I'll sweep away the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea, idols that cause the wicked to stumble. And I destroy all mankind on the face of the earth, declares the Lord. I'll stretch out my hand against Judah and against all who live in Jerusalem. I will destroy every remnant of Baal worship in this place, the very names of the idolatrous priests, those who bow down to the roofs to worship the starry host, those who bow down to swear by the Lord, and swear by the Lord, and who also swear by Moloch, those who turn back from following the Lord, and neither seek the Lord nor inquire of him.
Okay, good. So there's a call to attention. Does that sound anything like anything familiar that may have come out of the teaching or instruction of Moses? You see, I'll remove man and beast. I'll remove the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea. This is a reversal of creation. Do you hear that? The days of creation. And this is an obvious intention here. The prophet here is being very intentional in his message. The judgment comes. You've got this. Yeah, you like that? It's another language here, but it's obviously got the point. I did a Google search for this. I found the perfect slide to implicate the day of the Lord is coming as a day of judgment, and it's going to reverse to the nth degree God's involvement. This is the covenant lawsuit case against Judah, and the prophet is building his case, going back to the very beginning. God is going to reverse the blessings. It's almost like a reversal of creation is what the prophet's saying in verses 2 through 3. This reference here that Derek read was, he references it's going to involve house cleaning. In other words, if I'm about going after the idolatry amongst my people, unfortunately, the house cleaning involves not, stripping things away. It was just no different than when Joshua led God's people into the promised land from the very beginning. Battles were going to be fought, cities needed to be destroyed, and the paganism that was well entrenched at that time needed to be driven out to make space for the expression of God's people and covenant relationship. Although now, at the time of, here we have Zephaniah, now we've come full circle. So the same kind of operation needs to take place. Unfortunately now, it's directed at the majority of God's people with the faithful remnant mixed in. And it's all coming to a head. This reference here to the remnant of Baal, idolatrous priests, star worshippers, and religious syncretism, that those passages all the way down through verse 6, the reference to Milcom in verse 5, or these are pagan gods. So this is the syncretism that's being addressed. All of this is for the day of the Lord, beginning in verse 7. So what happens, how do we respond to this day of the Lord coming as judgment? Verse 7 says, "Be silent before the Lord God, for the day of the Lord is near, for the Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He's consecrated his guests. Then it will come about on the day of the Lord's sacrifice that I will punish the princes, the king's sons, and all who clothe themselves with foreign garments. And I'll punish on that day all who leap on the temple threshold, who fill the house of their Lord with violence and deceit. And we've seen this before. And on that day, declares the Lord, there will be a sound of a cry from the fish gate, a wail. It's mourning, it's grief, it's loss on the second quarter, and a loud crash from the hills. Wail, O inhabitants of Mordor, for all the people of Canaan will be silenced. All who weigh out silver will be cut off. There's another reference to the injustice that we saw in Amos when he addresses the fact that people who are exchanging things on the city streets, they still want to keep their shops open on the Sabbath because they're taking advantage of the poor and needy with dishonest scales and all of that we've seen before. So it's a lot of the same kind of thing that we see here. So, this day of the Lord reference coming from the prophet, if it's not going to happen because of the reform efforts of a king, Josiah, it'll ultimately be accomplished on the day of the Lord. It's this reversal of injustice. The Lord will have the last say with regards to this. Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but the top picture there, the fish, you were talking about earlier in the last book about how they worship the fish,
Yeah.
things, and so is that kind of...
There's Mesopotamian reference to Dagon. It was also adopted by the Philistines. They had kind of picked up on the Dagon idea, basically. But yeah, that's the representation. This is the child sacrifice to Moloch idea. Yeah.
I dare say that the papal hat looks pretty much the same.
That was not intentional on my part, but this picture here.
Top picture, the center. Fish hat.
Oh, looking like the Pope. The Pope hat? I don't know. It's just a hat. But you can make that connection in your Sunday school class. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, well, let's finish up here because somebody's got to get to Target. And for his mom. All right. No. Yeah. So verse 13. So like Habakkuk, we see this day of the Lord will come. This is going to be a defeat, a day of exile. But Zephaniah is not going to name any particular army. So this is the description. We've seen this kind of language before. Verse 13. Their wealth will become plunder, their houses desolate. They'll build houses but not inhabit them, and plant vineyards but not drink their wine. Near is the great day of the Lord, day of the Lord, day of the Lord. Near and coming very quickly. Listen, the day of the Lord. In it the warrior cries out bitterly. A day of wrath is that day, a day of trouble and distress, a day of destruction and desolation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of trumpet and battle cry against the fortified cities and against the cornered high towers, and I will bring distress on men so that they'll walk like the blind because they've sinned against the Lord, and their blood will be poured out like dust and the flesh like dung. This is graphic. Neither their silver or gold will be able to deliver them. On that day, the Lord's wrath and all the earth will be devoured in fire and his jealousy, for he will make up a complete end, indeed a terrifying one, of all the inhabitants of the earth. Well, it's a little more widespread, and it seems to be a broader picture of the day of the Lord. This is the day of the Lord that's coming, and there'll be judgment that'll implicate not just God's people, but all of the nations around. We'll see that here in just a minute. We'll come back to that as we end the book of Zephaniah. And we're going to see other prophets, like when we get to Ezekiel, this global judgment idea will start to, we'll have more picture and more color that will be splashed in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39. We'll talk about judgment that will implicate all of the nations of the earth. So, in response to this, and you can kind of be creative a little bit and imagine the prophet, turning up this rhetoric, the heat of his prophetic message. But notice what happens in chapter 2. in the first 3 verses. The prophet says, Zephaniah, gather yourselves together. Yes, gather, O nation without shame. Before the decree takes effect, the day passes like chaff. Before the burning anger of the Lord comes upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger comes upon you. What do you do before the anger of the Lord, of the day of the Lord comes upon you? What do you do? What's the answer? Verse 3. You seek the Lord, all of you humble of the earth who have carried out his ordinances. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger. Now, that's not a surefire promise, but it does give you more instruction on how you're to respond. You are the humble who are being referred to here. You're to seek righteousness, continue to seek humility. Perhaps the Lord will spare you for the full onslaught of anything that might happen, but the posture and the language still remains the same. And then we have in Zephaniah, beginning in chapter 2, verse 4, more, and like we've seen before in other prophets, oracles against the nations. A little bit of that is thrown in here in Zephaniah chapter 2, the large portion of it, verse 4 through verse 15, against the Philistines, the Moabites, the Ammonites, and this is like what we've seen before. Oracles against the nations. God's concern for the nations is certainly in view, especially when we talk about the day of the Lord. There's going to be a broader context for God's judgment. And then after that, we move into chapter 3, verse 1 through 5. Now the attention is directed at Jerusalem. Now the prophet Zephaniah focuses the Lord's charge against it's close to home, right? In chapter 3, verse 1. I want to have somebody else see. Seth, I haven't picked on you yet. Have I? Why don't you read for us chapter 3, verse 1, down through verse 5.
Woe to her who is rebellious and defiled, the oppressing city. She listens to no voice. She accepts no correction. She does not trust in the Lord. She does not draw near to her God. Her officials within her are roaring lions. Her judges are evening wolves that leave nothing till the morning. Her prophets are fickle, treacherous men. Her priests profane what is holy. They do violence to the law. The Lord within her is righteous. He does no injustice. Every morning he shows forth his justice. Each dawn he does not fail. But the unjust knows no shame.
So this is a direct charge against Jerusalem. This is God's own people, and references to the leaders, to the prophets, to the priests. What are they doing? Profaning the sanctuary, misrepresenting God, misrepresenting God's instruction, the Torah, teaching injustice and unrighteousness and all of those things. So this is what we have going on. Before salvation comes judgment in verse 8. Therefore, what's the prophet say? Therefore, wait for me, declares the Lord. For the day when I rise up to the prey, indeed my decision is to gather nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out on them my indignation, my judgment, and all my burning anger. For all of the earth will be devoured by the zeal or the fire of my zeal. And that's the judgment that always comes before salvation. But notice Zephaniah, because his focus on the day of the Lord, there's this global idea that now is implicating the nations. And where did the nations participate? After the judgment, verse 9. For then I will give to the peoples, that is peoples, nations, purified lips, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord. To serve him, I love this passage, shoulder to shoulder. So their shoulder is brushed up against somebody else's shoulder. And I think that's a picture of, you have this distinction. This gets into theological controversy, but I think I'm on the right side of it. It's not something to break a church up over, but we're hearing it this week, the future for Israel. Israel, will they be uniquely distinct on this day? will Israel merge and be a distinct ethnic and political entity? In other words, I think there's a sense that you've got the nations remaining to be themselves as a nation, a unique ethnic group, shoulder to shoulder with other unique nations, all coming together and participating in this Day of the Lord activity. That's just an interesting picture, but there's other ideas about that, and some of them get really complicated to explain, and I'm not going to do it here because we have to finish early tonight. But we have Isaiah, the parallel Isaiah passage that we've already looked at. It parallels this idea from Zephaniah a little bit of what we saw. Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, where Isaiah says, now it will come about in the last days. It's the same future vision of the day of the Lord. The mountains of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains and will be raised above the high hills. I'm in chapter 2, verses 2 through 4 in Isaiah. And many peoples, here's the same idea, will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us concerning his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For the Torah will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He'll judge between nations. He'll render decisions for many peoples. And what will happen as a result? They will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war. So there's going to be a time of peace, but the nations are involved, and they're streaming up to Mount Zion. That's where the Lord himself, when he comes back on this day, will sit and reign and rule. All right, we're almost to the end. Now, I think I've already talked about that shoulder-to-shoulder idea. And again, parallel to what we just read in Isaiah, verse 12 through 14. But I will leave among you a humble and lowly people. They will take refuge in the name of the Lord, in the reputation of the Lord. This is the righteous remnant. The remnant of Israel will do no wrong and tell no lies, nor will a deceitful tongue be found in their mouths, for they will feed and lie down with no one to make them tremble. What will you be doing? Shout for joy, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O Israel. Rejoice and exult with all your heart, O daughter of Jerusalem. The Lord has taken away his judgments against you. He's cleared away your enemies, and the capital K, King of Israel, the Lord, is in your midst. You'll fear disaster no more. In that day it will be said of Jerusalem, don't be afraid, O Zion. Don't let your hands fall limp. The Lord, your God, is in your midst. And how is the Lord your God? How is his posture towards you, towards the remnant, the righteous remnant in that day? This is kind of like a hallmark card of the Old Testament. It's really kind of a hidden gem buried in the book of Zephaniah. But look at verse 17. The Lord your God is in your midst. He's a victorious warrior. He will exult over you with joy. He will be quiet over you in his love, and he will rejoice over you with shouts of joy. That's how the Lord is to us. Isn't that cool? Yeah. And that's encouragement, because that's our future, and that reminds us of the unwavering commitment that the Lord has for us and is towards us. It will be a time when the King comes and dwells amongst his people and establishes peace. Let's see. Just have one more thing. That's kind of the idea that I talked about there in verse 17. And this is the hallmark card of the Old Testament. It talks about the Lord's feelings towards the faithful remnant. Here's that picture of the heart in the clouds. And this last picture, the victorious warrior. I love this picture. It's kind of captures the idea from Zephaniah. The victorious warrior who exults over us with joy. He remains quiet over us in love, and he rejoices over us with shouts of joy. And that's God. That's who he is. He's that picture. So the Lord's concern is always for the faithful remnant, wherever they are, wherever they may be found. And his full intention is to bring them back to Zion and bring about this restoration that not only just includes you all, but the righteous remnant and coming back from the exile, wherever they might be. That includes the nations of the world, as we'll start to see here. So that's the day of the Lord, and that's where we end. Yeah, 15 minutes early. That's not too. No, a whole half hour. Usually we get out at 9, right? 30 minutes early tonight. What do you think of that? All right. Yeah, you got to get out of here. Any questions on the midterm?